All right, it's spooling almost there. I'll let you know when it starts to go live. All right, we are live on YouTube.
Okay. And do you need to start a recording too, or just?
Yeah, it just did. Yeah, so we are now recording.
Very good. Well, in that case, I will go ahead and call to order the July 26, 2022 meeting of the Oregon City Historic Review Board to order. First, we will ask if there are any public comments not related to items on the agenda this evening. Hearing that there are none, we'll go ahead and move into the business for the evening. We'll go ahead and slightly rearrange the agenda tonight and start with item number 2 on the agenda, which is preservation grant for fascia and gutter repair at the Joseph and Vanna Lock House at 810 John Quincy Adams Street.
All right, I didn't present, do a PowerPoint for this, but I am going to find my screen. Apologies. I'm going to, let's see, there we go. So with the preservation grant, so this is the, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so for this fiscal year, this is your first preservation grant in front of the Historic Review Board. They run July 1 through June 30th. So the Historic Review Board has $5,000 for this fiscal year. This is an application for a designated structure at 810 JQ Adams for fascia repair and gutter repair. The applicant in this situation provided one bid, and they can talk to you a little bit about the bid when I'm done presenting. And based on previous understanding of the preservation grant program prior to Ms. Reed being the Historic Review Board staff member, it was my understanding that normal repair that any property owner would need to do would not fall under the grant program, but items that kind of go above and beyond a traditional homeowner yearly or quarterly expenses for upkeep would be eligible. So that's something the board can talk about this evening, is this application for approval of just the fascia repair and the gutters. And if it's for the gutters, do you have a direction for staff moving forward about when that might be approved and when that might not be approved? So I can scroll through if the board has any questions, but the applicant did provide the bid and the information about the fascia. So I'll go back up to the top and see if that board has any questions before I pass it over to the applicant. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then I'm going to hand it. Jake, can you hear me? Okay, do you want?
Oh, never mind. I found that. It looks like Christina is freezing.
No problem. You can go ahead and hand it over to Jake if you want to tell us a little bit about your project and your application.
Okay, sure. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, really well.
Yeah, so we have owned this home since 2011, and we have a section of roof where the fascia and the barge boards where they come together have rotted pretty much at all the corners. So there's some carpentry work that needs to be done to restore that exterior lumber. It's being done in conjunction with a total roof replacement for us. So the bid that I submitted I was able to have the contractors separate out just the barge and fascia work. I know a roof repair would not fall under what the grant program qualifies for, so I didn't submit that part. So this is strictly just for the carpentry. And as far as I understand, the gutters have, the gutter in that section where the barge and fascia boards are being replaced has to come down in order to replace that lumber. So it's kind of one and the same. The gutters and the carpentry that has to be done is all done together. And in the eyes of the contractors I've been talking to, that's all one project. So that's why I submitted it as both. So yeah, this is actually my second application for the preservation grant. I was awarded a grant a few years back for kind of what I would think would be similar work, exterior carpentry, rot repair is what we had done that was approved in the past. So I thought this was a decent project to bring to you all.
Okay. Could you tell us a little bit more about, since the gutters seem to be maybe a spot that there's a little bit of a questions, are the gutters that are on there now are not historic or original to the house?
I'm not sure, honestly, what would qualify as a historic gutter or not. I think they are just steel gutters. It's what was on the house when we bought it, and they actually are functioning fine. It's just that they have to take them down to get to the lumber, and I've learned that they pretty much get mangled and just have to be replaced once they come down.
Gotcha. Any other board members have questions for the applicant?
Just a question. Historically, Christina or Grant, how these exterior repairs like this, how have they been treated in the past? And is there any precedence that has been set?
Well, the work with the fascia repair and the drywall meet the preservation grant program. If the applicant came in just to ask for gutter replacement, it would be the same as if they came in for roof replacement. It's not eligible. I think this question is this piece of the gutter replacement is kind of like integrated in. So is there conditions the board wants to put on what they will and won't replace as part of this as it relates to the gutter? And it really is your call. I think, in general, when applicants come in, it's nice to provide direction of like, this is what the board sees as eligible as the preservation grant program, and this is where they don't see it's eligible, and this is their thought process of it.
Yeah, a little bit tricky there. Definitely the fascia and barge board, it's very similar to other stuff we've approved. And it makes sense that you can't really make the repair without replacing the gutters in that section. So then I guess it becomes a question of, do we consider it part of just the one repair and grant in full, or do we want to reduce the amount proportionate to kind of remove the gutter portion from the bid, I guess?
I think the proportionate reduction sounds reasonable as in some token way.
Any other board members have any comments or opinions?
I didn't see that. I was just trying to find the sort of gutters versus fascia bid, and it all seems to be one. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you know how much the gutters are versus the fascia repair?
Was that a question for me?
Yes, it was.
No, I don't know. They didn't line item that for me. The best I was able to get them to separate was the roof from this repair. So I could always go back and ask. I'm sure they would be happy to separate it out or assign dollar amounts for me. I've already signed this contract, so it would probably be more of like an email or something they would give me.
The board could choose a specific criteria of approval, and I could work with the applicant on the back end for documentation.
Okay. I think I would approve the fascia, but maybe not necessarily the gutter replacement.
I'm with you.
Same.
Is there a question about the labor? So the physical gutter replacement, like the cost of the gutter, but maybe the labor is encumbered of the project, of like taking everything down and the labor to take off the gutters. And I don't know if there's any labor of ripping off a gutter.
If I may, I can speak to that a little bit. The majority of, from what I've been told by this contractor, the majority of the work is they're snapping a chalk line on the existing roof and they're cutting that material back 6 inches. And they've kind of said that like making the gutter on site and putting that up it's kind of the easier part of the job. Cutting into the roofing material, stripping out the rotted wood and putting that back up seems to be as far as labor goes, that seems to be the labor intensive part. But
Could we shoot at a percentage? What does the other board members think about that? A percentage of what this is, the total horse.
Yeah, that was kind of my thought, was rather than going through the work of, asking them to go split it out and then come back to staff, just, reduce a little bit. Christina, could you remind me, so if the bid is 1,134, the maximum grant is 50% of that, is that?
That's correct.
Okay, so
567 is, I think, what it says on the application for the grant amount requested.
yeah, so if we were to maybe subtract $250 from the total amount and $125 from the grant amount or something like that, would that be a reasonable, I don't know what,
From my understanding, the cost of the gutter is not the expensive part. So it could just be the line item of take the cost, because that's just a fixture cost. And that could be an easy revision. And then it's 50% of that. And that's one option. But I don't know.
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine with doing it as just a straight line item revision if
Okay.
we want, or like if it's easy to say like 90% or of the requested amount, or if that seems reasonable or to the board. I think it is probably going to be a little bit higher than what Grant, it was just suggesting. I don't think it'll be quite that much off, but I would be comfortable with either of those.
Yeah, I guess going back to the applicant, would you prefer to save the work of having to ask them to go split it up, or would you rather do it that way and then get the precise amount? We can approve up to an amount to batch staff.
yeah, I like the idea of reducing work for everybody involved. So it'd be great if we could land on a number tonight. I'm just grateful for this program. I think it's really neat that the city does this, and the specific dollar amount is not going to make or break much for me. So I just think it's a nice thing, and whatever you guys feel is appropriate, I'm fine with. So.
In simplifying everything, if we just, let's say we arrived at saying $400 grant to on this and move ahead.
So that would be $167 off the requested amount. So value of the gutters for 320 or something like that, give or take. That'd be fine with me if everyone thinks that's a reasonable amount.
I would vote to go a little higher than that. I would vote for maybe in the like 450 to 500 range, but I'm open.
For what to approve on the grant.
Mhm.
I agree.
Okay. Yeah, I think I agree too. 234. So 450 would put the value of the gutters at around the $234 if we did it that way. So, okay. Then do we have a motion to approve the grant application for an amount of $450?
Okay, I'll move to approve the grant application for $450.
I'll second that.
All right, motion carries. Jake, I'll send you an email this week and be able to drop off a sign for you. And the work's done. You can send me an email and I'll do a quick site visit and process the check.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate you all.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jake.
Thank you. Do I need to stay for anything else, or is that's it for me? Okay. All right. Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Now we'll go ahead and move back to the public hearing portion of the agenda. And I will go ahead and read the script for the public hearing portion now. So there is one public hearing on land use applications scheduled tonight. Our role is to conduct the public hearing and to make decisions about the matter before us. In making those decisions, we must apply the applicable codes and laws and cannot vary from or change those laws or codes. Members of the Historic Review Board are to be unbiased. Before the start of the hearing, I will ask the Historic Review Board members whether they have any potential conflicts such as family, financial, or business relationships with any of the applicants or with regard to the land in question. I will also ask whether any Historic Review Board member has discussed the application in question with any of the parties or has independent knowledge of relevant facts such as from a visit to the site in question. Any member of the audience may question any Historic Review Board member about their disclosures. A staff report has been prepared for each application and has been made available to the public 7 days before the first public hearing. The staff report identifies the approval criteria that apply to each applicant's proposal. Staff has analyzed the criteria which are contained in the staff report. The quasi-judicial hearing procedure that the Historic Review Board will follow is set out in state law and the Oregon City Municipal Code. The hearing procedure steps are shown on the Historic Review Board website. Public testimony will be called on in the order it was requested in advance of the meeting. If you have not emailed city staff at planning@orcity.org to request to speak and would like to testify, please raise your virtual or physical hand when I ask if there are others in the audience who would like to participate. For the public record, please begin all testimony stating your name and city of residence. If you would like to receive a copy of the notice of decision, please state your mailing address or email address. Testimony and evidence should be directed toward the applicable approval criteria. If you believe other criteria apply in addition to those addressed in the staff report, identifying, discuss those criteria and explain how and why you believe they apply to the application under consideration. Any person may submit written or digital material while the public record is open on each application. Any written materials received by city staff during the time period in which the record is open will be placed in the record. Written materials submitted during the public hearing must be presented to the city staff in order to become part of the record. If you intend for PowerPoint presentations, reports, pictures, or other exhibits to be used in oral testimony to be placed in the record, copies must be submitted to staff while the record is still open. Any person wishing a continuance to present additional evidence and testimony or to keep the record open to respond to new evidence must make that request before the public testimony portion of the hearing is closed. If the Historic Review Board makes a decision with which you disagree, any issue that you may wish to appeal must have been raised on the record for the consideration of the City Commission or the State Land Use Board of Appeals or both. Without raising the issue on the record with sufficient detail and accompanied by statements or evidence that the city and all parties can respond to the issue, will not be deemed appealable to the City Commission or State Land Use Board of Appeals. In addition, failure of an applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient detail to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Now we'll open the record for Oregon City file number GLUA 22-00006, general land use application, HR 22-00002, historic review for new construction, and HR 22-00007, historic review for demolition. I will ask each historic review board member if they've had any ex parte contacts, conflicts of interest, bias, or any other statement to declare, and if they've visited the site. Board member Edgar.
I have visited the site. I have no conflicts of interest. I have talked to Christina via email just to get asking questions about the pitch of the roofs of the house.
Board member Belknap.
I have visited the site. I have no ex parte contact or conflicts.
Board member Ferry.
I visited the site. I have no ex parte contact and I have no conflicts of interest.
Thank you. And I've also visited the site, have nothing to declare, and have no conflicts of interest or ex parte contacts. Does anyone in the audience wish to question any of the historic review board members about these disclosures? Hearing none, we'll go ahead and turn it back over to staff for the report.
Thank you, Chair Blythe. Let me share my screen. And I will start a slideshow. All right. So this is historic HR 2202, but it also involves the, as Chair Blythe, Chair Blythe mentioned, it is also a demolition request as well. You have some options this evening. Approve the proposal with one P, apologies. Approve the proposal with recommended conditions, approve the proposal with revised conditions, deny the proposal, or continue the hearing to next month and provide staff additional direction, and the record stays open. This evening we received an email from the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association, and I just pasted this email directly into the PowerPoint this evening. They do not have any objections to the proposal, the demolition, the replacement, or the preservation incentives for the reduced setbacks. So I wanted to pass that on. That was also emailed to the board prior to the hearing. There are conditions of approval for this application. I have it on a slide. The board can go back and refer to these as the board has their conversation. But for the most part, the first 6 conditions are what generally has been provided for accessory buildings in the McLaughlin district. Notice that there is a condition for a 4 to 6 inch reveal, which is kind of a standard generic reveal for a horizontal siding. So that's one thing the board can look at. Do you want the applicant to have a reveal that's slightly different than the reveal of the house, a little bit closer? That's a conversation the board can have. The rest of the conditions relate to the carriage door, standard conditions about windows, window materials, no simulated grids, no extruded or exterior extruded grids are allowed on the one proposed window. And then approval of the demolition and the preservation incentive. The key thing is, well, the Historic Review Board can provide a preservation incentive to allow the applicant to go as close as the property line. The applicant needs to work with our building division to verify that what they proposed meets building code and is in the right location. Specifically, no eaves can cross the property line. So that condition is really moving back to the applicant when they move, when they submit for their building permit. And that kind of allows, maybe they need to be 6 more inches or 5 more inches. This approval allows them to be in the place they need to be to meet building code.
Christina? We're not able to see the.
Oh, you aren't?
Scrolling.
Oh, interesting. What can you see, Sabrina?
Just your screen with the HR 22-00.
Well, that's super annoying. Thank you for letting me know that.
We can see the little stuff on the side too, but not the
thing. Okay, give me 1 second. I'm going to see if I can change. Does that change what you see? Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So I am going to, can you see the items to be entered to the record screen?
we see the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association.
Okay. Yep. So that's the slide I showed. Thank you very much, Board Member Ferry, for letting me know that. This is the comment made by Wendy Marshall, the land use chair of the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association. These are the conditions. So as I said, really the first 5 are really related to material considerations for the garage. Number 6 relates to the preservation incentive. Once again, the applicant needs to work with the building division for the final location. And then this does approve the demolition of the existing garage. I'm going to move. The one thing I do want to add, this is related to in this conversation when the board after the presentation moves for deliberation. There was a question from Board Member Edgar about how it relates to the garage and the roof pitch of the garage, and what should the optimal roof pitch be for a new garage that replaces a flat roof, but is related to a pretty steep pitch Gothic Revival 1890s house. So one thing I wanted to direct related to we don't have design guidelines for Gothic Revival because it's a niche design. But for the Queen Anne and Queen Anne vernacular, the design guidelines for new construction do give us some direction about garages to be rectangular, less decorative, and a lower roof slope. So the question is, what is the right lower roof slope? It looks like the main house is about a 12-12 roof pitch with it looks to be about an 8-12 secondary side roof pitch. And I realize apologies for the misspelling on that. The other thing I wanted to provide direction on is this is a situation where you have design guidelines for new construction because it's a new building in the McLaughlin Conservation District, but it is a new construction on a designated parcel. So I brought in the Secretary Standards for Rehabilitation, both 9 and 10, which really relate to additions and alterations, be additions detached or attached. And as part of the deliberations, I think it's important for the board to kind of provide direction is, has the applicant met those Secretary of Standards for Rehabilitation where new additions be detached, that they are differentiate new from old, but are compatible with massing size and scale and architectural features, and that they should be taken in a manner where if removed, it's not going to affect the integrity. So a detached building is a great way to meet number 10. But number 9 is, I always have a picture of a balanced scale in my head where you have on one side of the scale, you have something that's compatible with massing size and scale, but then the other side, you have a place where you're differentiating old from new. So too far one end, you've differentiated the old from a new, but maybe you're not as compatible with massing size and scale. And when you're the other way around, maybe you aren't doing a good job differentiating old from new. So I wanted to add those 2 standards in the record and how the board thinks that this application meets them. So the property is located at 814 6th Street. It's the Jacob and Mary Madeir house. You can see 6th and I'm trying to figure out the cross street is. That should be Addison, I think. This is a picture from the survey form, so it's probably early 2000s. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The next slide. These are some Google Street Views showing the location with the arrow. This is the existing garage with the foliage all around it. This is from the side view of the property. This is from the applicant showing the overgrowth and the existing condition. So as to your right, you kind of see it's the rear addition of the house with a lower roof pitch. That looks, I'm guessing, to be about 812, just from an eye guess. The applicant also provided additional photos showing how dilapidated this garage is. And really, I think a key photo is looking at those poles that are keeping the garage up, and that's from the neighbor's house. So that is really showing the danger that this garage has, and really the inability to repair and rebuild. A lot of times you can repair and rebuild, but this is just, it's not tenable at this point. Next slide. This is the applicant's proposal, really building a new building in the general location of the existing garage. With, instead of having a flat roof, it's showing a pitched roof of 612. Next shows the elevation. So it shows the pitch roof, and the back, it does show one square window in the back. So next slide. The applicant provided the following information on materials. So they had indicated that it is a hardy board smooth siding, but did not indicate the reveal. So staff put in the standard 4 to 6 inch reveal. So the board can decide if they want to have a more specified reveal. The applicant has not proposed a window product. So staff has provided a standard condition of approval about using window materials that are approved by the board. And then no window shall have simulated grids between the glass panes. So if that applicant wants to continue and pursue the divided light window, it should be exterior extruded grids or a single pane square window. The garage door is the Wayne Dalton, which is a steel door, carriage style door. They should not, applicant has not indicated windows or not, so the board can provide additional direction if you want to provide direction on if the applicant can move forward with windows or not windows in the design. So the applicant has also proposed a preservation incentive as part of this. Our existing city code has a 3-foot setback for accessory buildings in the rear. And right now the existing garage is right at the property line. And so the applicant wants to build back to the existing kind of footprint of the historic structure. And staff really see this as an excellent example of the use of preservation incentive, and really what the board was thinking of when the preservation incentive program was created in the early 2000s. It helps retain the historic configuration that's currently not allowed by right and zone. As I explained earlier, if the board approves the preservation incentive, the applicant will still have to work with the building division to make sure building code is met. And so therefore may need to be off a little bit from the property line to ensure that the eaves don't cross the property line. Let's see. The applicant, as part of this package, is proposing a demolition, and the applicant indicated that the structure creates a potentially hazardous condition with the neighboring property, which you all can see from the photos, and the support posts are needed to prevent the building from falling. Allowing the demolition of the garage will allow the applicant to remove the potential hazard and provide a new usable garage on site, improving the use of the site and creating a new asset on the property. So staff has found that the applicant has provided sufficient findings, both visually and in writing, to support the demolition request. And once again, the board has their options tonight. So I'm going to stop my share. Oops. I have a double screen, and that's why it's providing conflict. Sorry about that. So I'm available for any question. The applicant was not able to make it this evening. They're on vacation, but they don't. So if you have any specific questions that you need them to answer that you don't feel can be integrated into a revised condition of approval, the board should continue the application. But if you feel either as submitted and with conditions proposed by staff or amended by the board, you feel like you could approve this application this evening, staff recommends you move forward with approval. So I can, in your discussions, let me know if you want me to share anything on the screen while you discuss.
if I could start off, I
Go-
talked to Denise a little bit, or to Denise, Christina, about the feeling when I was looking at the design, the pitch of the roof in relationship to like the front facade dormer that's there in this Queen Anne type design. And it the overall original pitch of the roofs were very steep, and and it, to me, the only thing that I could see that I had a problem with was just that when you bring up the view of the garage looking at it from the street, it just looked flat, in a sense, out of proportion with what the designs of this particular type of house. And it was this kind of out of proportion part that led me to say, maybe it should have a steeper pitch to it. And that the back part that comes off is an add-on. And I look at it as either 10-12 or 12-12 on the back part. And to the way to me, if it transitioned even to a steeper part from that, what's in between, it actually would complement the kind of the imagery of the house and the garage and make them more compatible one to another. And as I got through kind of talking it out, and Christina sent me the building form type guidelines provided by the state, and I was looking through some of this stuff. It's just I wanted to hear from others, you guys, as to how you felt and what you saw. So that was my one single area of concern.
Thanks, Paul. Did you have a question for staff, or?
Yeah, I just felt like that. My question is a steeper pitch roof more appropriate?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you from experience, like I think of like my guiding direction has always been, when you have a 19th century house, the garage is always built many decades later, when the family got a car, right? And so and those garages are always kind of 1920s to 1940s design. They always had much smaller and shorter pitches. And in this situation, we had a flat roof, which is very typical. And so my only concern about providing a pitch that's steeper is that's not really what a 1920s to 1940s garage would have been. And you would not have had a steeper garage, you would not have had a steeper outbuilding for a garage in the 19th century. It would have been a barn, or would have been like another accessory building for a different use. And so I've always been wary of when you are replacing a garage on a 19th century building, that if you try to mimic the architecture too much, you're kind of creating a history that never happened. And so there is something about making sure that the garage is simpler designed, is compatible, but also doesn't bring in elements that would never have been built for a garage. So that's always kind of the, I mean, I see your point, board member Edgar, but I do worry about, I'm always on concern of the faking history. And so when you bring a steeper pitch in, it would never have been built like that in the 20s to the 40s. So it is an odd piece, because you're making a new garage to replace a garage that has gained significance over time, but was not built in the design style or the time period of the house by which is designated, if that makes sense. So I don't know if board members have anything else or a different opinion on that item.
Yeah, any other questions for staff? And then we'll confirm we don't have any public comment. Okay, if no more questions, then we know the applicant is not present at the meeting, but we'll go ahead and ask, I guess I see that Denise's name is on here, if there's any other public comments related to this application. Okay, guess not. In that case, we can go ahead and move into board deliberations. Just go around in order on the list on the screen here. Board member Belknap.
Thank you. My initial reaction was very similar to yours, Paul. I was like, gosh, it would look so much prettier if there was a little, something more complementary to the Gothic style, but I understand that that isn't what this garage was, it wasn't built at the same time, but aesthetically, I want it all to be cohesive, more cohesive than it is currently, and it is proposed to be. And so I am also very much struggling with, do we preserve this 20s to 40s, more feel, or do we encourage like more complementary design of the main structure? And I'm always wanting to go more complementary to the main structure because I don't think the existing garage is all that special or attractive, but the house sure is. So I'm also torn here.
Board member Ferry.
I actually think that the proposal is appropriate. I think that adding a pitch on the roof that would be steep enough to complement the roof pitch on the house would create sort of a false sense of history, but also it would bring attention to a building that's supposed to serve the main building, but not be in competition with it. So I think asking for a slightly steeper roof if we wanted to, just to mimic whatever's on that back addition. But I think going as steep as the Gothic Revival pitch of the roof is I think it would draw too much attention to a building which is supposed to be in service to a beautiful building and possibly detract from it. That's my personal feeling.
Paul, did you have anything additional to add, or?
Been just listening. I appreciate everyone's opinion here too. So I'm holding up a little bit till I can hear what you have to say too, Grant.
Okay. So for my take on it, I see both perspectives there. My biggest concern would actually be the home directly adjacent to the garage, not the garage not the home that the garage belongs to, which is, I think, that would be Madison. No, wait, what? I should have written down what address this was. I think Madison Street, maybe 5. Well, I didn't write it down, but if you look on Google Maps, there's a cross gable, and this is a pretty low slung home right there. And so I don't think we would want to suggest a roof pitch that would make the garage kind of rival the adjacent structure there. I could actually, I don't know if Christina, you're able to pull that up, or
I actually have, and I have the survey form, so let me do that. I'm gonna get to, stop share. I want to make sure I'm there. Here we go. So I'm going to, it's the survey form at 513 Madison. Can everyone see this? This is the next door. It's looks like it's a 1920, which is quite late, but it's quite late for a vernacular Queen Anne, but you're right. It is a much smaller building. And if I can look on Google Maps if that's also helpful for the board.
I would say it's helpful based on what
Okay.
I'm if you could pull it up.
Okay, give me 1 second. Lots of good tree coverage. Hold on 1 second. Let's go to Zoom and share. Okay, so this is the historic resource house on just south of the property on Madison, and I'm going to zoom up so we can see the garage. You're right, it is very close. So kind of picture right here, if you can see this is this question of the roof pitch.
Yeah, so I think, I don't know how much taller the wall's height will be, if that's shorter than what the new proposed is, but I think the net result, I wouldn't want to see the top roof line rival the neighboring structure too much. So kind of based on that image, I would say that the 612 that's proposed, or maybe an 812 would be okay, but I don't think anything higher than I don't know if the neighboring house would be something on the order of a 1012, but that would be my
Yeah,
thought anyway.
Do you want me to keep sharing or stop share? Let me know when you want me to stop sharing the screen.
I've seen what I need to see. I don't know if anybody else wants to see anything else.
I'm good.
I'm good.
Yeah. Christina, did you say that you think the existing addition on the back of the main structure that is next to this garage, you think is about an 812?
It could be it could be a 1012. I'm just doing an I guess.
Okay.
So 8 or 12, 8 or 10.
Mm-hmm.
well, I would love to see it a little bit steeper, but if that just because I think the view of it to me is just detracting when it just appears to be very flat. And it's just the perception of what it is. It's based upon the design of the house and the steep roofs and pitches and everything. And I just think that it should be a little bit steeper. But that's that's up to somebody else. If there's a majority that want that, fine. I would that's how I would like to see it go.
I think it was Sabrina who suggested maybe matching the addition pitch in the back. Is that right? Of that 812 or whatever we think it is. And so maybe giving it just a little bit of a pop up. I don't know. Do we think that would be beneficial to the design, or would it make it just adding another element and then creating more height? What is that a clear question? Sorry, in my head it was more of a clear question. Would going with that 812 pitch be a good compromise or a bad compromise? I guess maybe a better way to put it. I don't know. I'd love to hear your all thoughts.
I think Grant's right that there's definitely the house next door to consider since they are so close together. Because you probably don't want, a bunch of different roof pitches all sort of put together like that. So I would think that sort of matching what's on the addition of the house that would have the garage or own the garage would make sense to me, but I don't think I would go any steeper in pitch than that.
I'm kind of starting to lean that way as well, thinking about it with, again, like all the different pitches and all the different angles that are
Yes.
happening right there in that view. If we could match something, and if it's just that addition and keeping it simple with that, I think that's totally reasonable.
I'm in on that too. I think if there's a compatibility to matching, particularly with that view of the house that's on Monroe, and trying to match to a degree where it is more in sync or in complementary is a win.
Okay, I can get behind that.
One thing to consider, unfortunately, because the applicant is not here, in a perfect world, would ask the applicant, like, can you work with that? And they say yes or no, this is why. We don't have the second part, ability. So I do worry about providing a condition and then the applicant, if only they were here, could have responded. And then, so on staff level, I am a little worried and would almost have a potential, like a preliminary recommendation and then finalize it at the August meeting to allow the applicant a chance to respond if there's a technical thing that we just don't know about. That would, I mean, that's my general thinking since they aren't here to respond. But
You,
they're gonna-
in your wording, Christina, you used that it should be compatible in the conditions of approval with the designs of the house.
I don't think I specifically have a condition. Let me look. No, it is the proposed conditions of approval are based on what the applicant turned in for their elevation drawings and their footprint. The conditions really are related to the material and the and allowing the demolition and the location of the preservation incentive. And so my only worry, and this is just a process worry, is that if the board approves this and the applicant wants to, in a sense, rebut, they have to apply for a new hearing and a new revision. So really it's hard. It's like, do you want to move forward and apply for your building permit this month or not? And I just don't have them here this evening. So that's the only thing that gave me pause.
And we create wording that provides the option to go to an 812 or to a compatible pitch with the adjoining house and say, and have that as an option in the conditions of approval.
We can, but that means that if they want to move forward with the 612, are you allowing that? I guess is the larger question. And if you aren't, generally as staff, I would recommend a tentative decision and allow the applicant to respond just because they're not here this evening.
Is
Okay,
it?
so,
Oh, sorry, Grant.
sorry, go ahead. Go
Oh.
ahead, Jessica.
I was just going to ask, is it easier for us to make a decision and say, yes, approved with the, recommended conditions with the 812 roof pitch, and then let them, go on and, move forward in their permits and all of that if they want to, and have them come back and say, actually, I would like to change this back to a 612 and here's why, or is it easier to just have them to give this, tentative thumbs up and have them come back? I don't know.
Yeah.
What's easier from your
It's timing and process. So if they are, if the decision is made, they actually have to reapply by this Friday for a revision. If it's continued, then it's just continued. So that's my only worry, is that really if they say, now there's a reason why I need to do 612 and this is why, and it either the board agrees with it or doesn't, but they have a reason, they can't present that till the September meeting.
I see.
Okay. So,
And they might still be on vacation through Friday.
Right. I'm just worried about like,
Wow.
that's some
Yeah.
logistics to get that forward by that timeline.
okay,
see.
so I'm thinking perhaps so given the kind of urgent condition of the existing structure, perhaps we approve the 2207 this evening
Mhm.
to allow the demolition. They could go forward with that and then adopt a additional preliminary condition of approval that the roof pitch match the pitch of the addition, maybe pending, and ask for the information to for next meeting with exactly what that pitch is.
We can't, so the board will do a basically, I would have two notices of decisions. I would split it into two separate notices. So one notice would come out of this meeting, which would be the demolition approval, and even the preservation incentive. Oh, no, it'd just be the demolition approval. And then the second one would be the new construction design with the preservation incentive, because that's the path by which they asked for it. So, and then that's fine. I can do a no decision this evening and then let them know the tentative direction and get any feedback. And if they have any feedback, then they can present it at the August meeting. If they have no feedback, then it can just be finalized at the August meeting.
The preservation incentive needs to be approved in this, and the reveal on the siding should be what I wonder what the period type, what was underneath the shakes of the house there originally, but what is the most inexpensive? Is there any difference in the expense of the siding when you go to 4 or 6?
It's just your reveal is more, so you're just buying more siding.
Okay.
I'm fine with the condition as written.
Okay.
All right, so it looks like a motion for let me get the file number, the demolition portion, and then continuation to the August meeting with a general direction for the remainder.
Yes.
Okay, so if someone wants to make a motion.
I move for HR 220007 for demolition be approved as per staff report.
Second that.
Chair Blythe, do you call or do I call? I don't know how it works for the board.
I guess, yeah, generally we've had staff call the
Okay.
roll.
Sorry. It's okay. Let's see. Do you say HRB member Belknap or do you say Jessica Belknap? I just want to have the same process.
Either. I think we've done it both ways.
Okay.
Aye.
Aye. Sabrina Ferry.
Aye.
Paul Egger.
Aye.
Chair Blythe.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay.
And then maybe a tentative decision motion, just so I can get clear direction on the record.
Well, I'll attempt it again. I move that each HR 220002 application for a garage be approved with conditions, where the added condition is that the roof pitch aligns with the neighboring houses so as to create compatibility.
Okay, and continue to the August 23rd meeting.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
and
right.
continue to a date certain of
August 23rd.
August 23rd.
To a date certain of August 23rd.
All right. We'll the same order. Sorry, Jessica Belknap,
Aye.
Sabrina Ferry,
Aye.
Paul Egger,
Aye.
and Chair Blythe.
Aye.
Okay, so I'll let the applicant know, and they will either provide additional information responding to that or say I'm fine with that, and I'll write up the revised condition and the board can approve it at the August meeting.
All right, very good. And we'll clarify that the public record is still open for HR 2202.
Right.
So that concludes the public hearing portion of the agenda. The final item this evening is the work session for middle housing design guidelines.
Great, thank you. Let me get my notes. So I don't have a presentation, but I can bring up the notes and we can kind of scroll through them and I can make notations. But just to provide a little bit of overview and remind everybody where we are with this design guidelines for middle housing. McLaughlin and Kenema and landmarks throughout the city have opportunities for new construction. And now starting June 30th of this year, there are more middle housing options added to all residential zones. So duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, townhomes, cluster homes are now all potentially available in areas that the board will be reviewing for new construction. And so there was definitely a move to provide greater direction to applicants who come in, because right now there's a little bit, we talk about single family residential or that kind of design type, and we talk about, commercial multifamily, but we kind of have a missing area here for our missing middle. And so with those design guidelines with the middle housing adopted, moving forward, anything would come in front of the board. So if something came in this fall for a duplex in McLaughlin, for example, the board would use our existing design guidelines. I would make a recommendation and use existing OCMC 1740 standards criteria for approval. What this does is just really provide more clarity to all parties earlier on in the design process. And so I've been worked with Kelly Reed before she left and worked on a revision based on the notes from the April Historic Review Board meeting. So this is kind of a draft in progress. Two items I wanted to highlight to the board before we move forward on looking through the draft section. With the City Commission approving, there are kind of, I think, two pieces that would be helpful when the board thinks about what kind of things might come in different districts. First piece is City Commission confirmed that development and the geologic hazards overlay is still subject to 2 units per acre. So therefore, middle housing, if you are in an area of geologic, you have a historic landslide area, you're in a steep slope area, or you're in a buffer around that, areas that are subject to the 2 units per acre reduced density, that would preclude the use of middle housing. So a lot of Kenema is precluded from middle housing. The historic commercial zone does not allow duplexes, triplexes, or row houses. So there are only going to be a few odd lots, probably more like on third, maybe. I'm just trying to think of there's going to be odd places in Kenema that are not in the historic commercial district and are not in the geohazard. And those are really the areas that might be subject to new middle housing. McLaughlin probably has more options that would be available for review for middle housing. And of course, landmarks may actually be something that the board may see more of, because kind of allowing new construction or an additional unit onto a landmark that may have a bigger lot, maybe something people might pursue. The second piece that the City Commission adopted is really the carrot approach of supporting the retention of existing housing stock by allowing detached duplexes and detached triplexes when one of the units is more than 5 years old. So if you have a house and maybe a larger backyard, or a larger side yard, you could build a second unit to be or a third unit to be a duplex or a triplex, and those units can be detached. If you have a vacant lot or you demolish the house, your duplexes, triplexes have to be attached, like all attached together. Fourplexes still need to be attached. That's where they kind of drew the line between threeplexes and fourplexes allowing detached, because that gets closer into the cluster housing. And so really the carrot was allowing the detached duplex and triplex, which I think is something that will be really helpful for the historic review board, because you can, rather than working on kind of adding an addition onto a historic house, you can look about, okay, is there a place for a smaller house on this lot? What should the design be? You know, could it be set back away? How is it oriented? That'll be definitely helpful as the board moves forward with this, rather than being forced to add on to an historic resource. Townhomes are allowed, and they could have up to, I think, 6 or 7 units together. The board can choose to say how many units can be attached. So you still may, I don't know if that exists in McLaughlin. Let's pretend there was a very large undeveloped lot where someone wanted to build 7 row houses. The board can determine, they can't say how many units you get, that's determined by the underlying zone, but they can say how many of those units can be attached together. You know, you could say you have to be 3 and 3. You can't be 7 together or 4 together. So those are the kind of things that the board can look at. And then, you know, things like garages, where the garage is located, just like you normally do. Garages have to be to the rear or side for townhomes. Those are the kind of things you can provide design advice to and design guidance. And I think the key thing to think about is the board has the ability to regulate middle housing to the level by which they regulate single family housing. So if you are putting conditions related to materials or size or architectural style or massing on single family, you can do the same thing for middle housing, but you can't put more onerous conditions on middle housing than you do on your single family housing. And I don't think that would be the case here at McLaughlin and with our historic review board, but that's always the case. If we can condition it for single family, we can condition it for middle housing. So that's kind of the larger overview. The key with these design guidelines, we've kind of wrote them to be considered almost like an inset page. So you would still open up the design guidelines, you know, figure out your district, figure out the background, the design, and then even start looking at the single family design types, but then you would kind of add this on at the end and say, is there anything additional overlaid on it because I now have a middle housing design. So that's the way to think about it. We try not to recreate the wheel and put things in that were already in the design guidelines. So I can open up the guidelines and we can walk through each one and hear the board's comments. I can answer questions before I share the screen, and then we can send this back to the board in the August meeting and keep working on it until you're at a place you feel you want to present it to the city commission for their recommendation.
Yeah, we could, I guess, maybe just walk through each section, and then if anyone has any comments on that, go through that way.
Okay. Let me get to my page, sorry. Oh, it's the memo, sorry. Here we go. Can everyone see this? The discussion draft, okay. So the first starts with introduction and then how to use the documents. So I can take comments on this, or you can, if you have any grammatical suggestions or just construction suggestions on how to changes. We don't have to wordsmith this tonight, but the goal is to understand and let people know how to use it. So one thing Kelly redid is she kind of, we were realizing that we were saying kind of the same things for each middle housing type. So rather than saying the same thing for duplexes, triplexes, and row houses, we kind of put them together and started to think about, are there all middle housing types general direction, and then should we go into the further direction below? So this was the first attempt at massing, providing kind of more of a metric approach to massing, which is what we heard in April. So one option was that Kelly had was how to determine the appropriate massing of your middle housing. Measure average height and square footage of nearest 6 historic resources. So you're coming with like a metric number. Or measure average height and square footage of nearest 6 structures over 50 years old. As we all know, there are historic resources, or there are historic buildings that very well could be designated and contribute to the district, but are not. So there's something to be said about looking at the massing piece for things over 50 years old. So that's something to think about. Does anybody have any thoughts about the step 1 approach of where to get your number for your average size of resources around you?
Comment would be that in Kenema, the first option is more appropriate because we always look at historic structures or contributing historic structures as to if what's applicable or what we're comparing to. But in McLaughlin, I don't think that is exactly the same way.
Here, any my McLaughlin folks, do you have any thoughts?
So just I kind of like the 50 years old metric for McLaughlin, just because there are some areas, particularly along 5th Street and 7th Street, where it's more of a municipal zone, where your buildings sort of vary greatly. And it'd be nice to consider some of the buildings that aren't necessarily considered historic resources, just as far as massing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as we all know, time marches on. 50 years is early 70s. So this will take in some of those 50s and 60s apartment buildings. So it is something to think about. That calculation may, depending on where you are, provide greater, support for higher massing based on kind of where you are and with a resource. So
yeah,
Is our goal to support higher massing though? I mean, is that going to be detrimental to,
yeah,
historic integrity of like McLaughlin or Kenema?
right. That's the $64,000 question plus inflation. I think this is the hard part, like the massing, I know it when I see it, or here's your metric number, get out your calculator, both have unintended consequences. So I don't know if I don't have a perfect answer, but I was hearing, this spring of, it would be nice to give people stronger direction so they know clearly I'm designing something outside of the realm that's going to be too much massing.
Mm-hmm.
And that is helpful, when people are looking at purchasing lots. I mean, I know over time when I've shared people design guidelines, some people walked away because that's not what they want to build, which is actually, it works in the sense of like, this was not the right person to buy this property. Or they're like, oh, I can do this. And they start working on their performa. So, there's good and bad points about both options. And so the existing design guidelines are more subjective in how they talk about massing, and it's very context sensitive, and you look specifically around you. And so it's not a math formula.
I guess like,
Yeah,
oh, go ahead, Grant.
I was just gonna say, I guess even middle housing aside for a moment, you know, we've definitely had cases where people bought lots, drew up plans, spent a lot of money, got to HRB, and then were kind of, at least I perceive that they were somewhat surprised that the massing was an issue, that they didn't quite, you know, they weren't able to read through the lines enough in the design guidelines as they were written to
Mhm.
realize that what they were presenting was not going to be acceptable. And so I do think having something that's a little more prescriptive could be good to kind of give them some guardrails and again prevent people from, you know, spending money or sinking money into the process trying to do something that's not going to get approved. However, I also, you know, we've also treated the design guidelines as a, if you stay completely within the bounds of the design guidelines, it's a rubber stamp type process that, like, by definition, if you meet the design guidelines, your application will be approved. And so I do also worry if we say, okay, 1.5 times is the number, that, you know, someone will be able to figure out the formula and they're going to figure out something that's 1.495 times the, you know, the size of the equation. And then it's going to be something that we would, you know, for whatever reason, the way it, you know, the massing will not be appropriate for where it's at. But
Mhm.
because we put it that way in the design guidelines, it'll kind of restrict our ability to deny it on that, you know, on that bounds or to bring it down.
There is, you know, like a lot of cities kind of do the 2 paths, which is like, here is your specific smaller house massing, 1.5 stories, X square foot footprint, X, you know, done. That's like, that's your safe harbor. Or you could kind of go through a process where you start analyzing the massing of the buildings around you. I mean, so that is one of the things where you could provide, you know, we're not saying no, but then now the burden really goes on the applicant to do a massing study. So that could be that way.
So it sounds like Grant is saying that it would be better to go with the 6 historic resources just to kind of tone things back in the beginning, so things don't sort of take off past what we might approve in the first place. That
If we're too prescriptive, that's the key, that they will try to fit it in. And subjectively, we may come back and take a look at it and say, this is not right. And so then we've kind of hung ourselves out on a prescriptive identification.
Yeah, I think we'd probably be okay with 1.5 times with the historic formula, where we could get in, yeah, that is the way I would lean. Although I might change it to contributing, because in Kenema, all structures are designated. So just to be more clear about what we're talking about, that infill houses are not, they may be designated, but they're not contributing.
Yes.
Okay. I
I'm
can
also
good.
right on there with, oh, sorry. I'm also right kind of along those lines with you, Grant. I think going on the smaller end of the 1.5 times and really focusing on the more historically or designated or contributing structures is maybe a good place for us to start as like a launching point for this program.
Okay, I'll incorporate that into the first 2 steps. I'm not sure. Kelly put 1.7. Okay, so we heard that. Should this be different for townhomes? And I guess that's something we can ask. We can talk when we get to the bottom. But one thing would be, and maybe that's the way you get about, you know, maybe it is different because you're saying 3 together. Maybe it is for town. At a later iteration, you could say for townhomes, you can be 1.x size, no more than 3 in a row. Like you give it, like townhomes can be their own special, like different animal because that might be hard. What we don't want to do is create such restrictive standards for townhomes that you actually can't physically get 3 townhomes together. And then we would be kind of over our skis a little bit in our ability to, because we wouldn't want to be over regulating to the point of denying a whole housing type. We don't want to be in that place. Okay, so I'm going to scroll down. Missing me. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to keep scrolling.
The other one thing I might like to add
Uh-huh.
to that section or consider adding is something about that the massing should be somewhat, I'm trying to think of how it should be worded, but something about that it should be appropriate to the style chosen. So depending on if they were to choose a vernacular or a bungalow or a whichever type of style that's in the rest of the design guidelines, that I think what we don't want is a caricature of a style, sort of.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
if
great.
you change, if you're increasing it, taking the style that's appropriate, but increasing it to a weird dimensions, it becomes sort of like
It becomes incompatible.
Yeah. Well, that's good because you can still go back to the beginning of the design guide and say, well, you met the middle housing calculation. Yeah, you design something that's not a bungalow. So go back to the beginning and design a bungalow. So you still have the ability, but I'll add that line in there. Okay, let me keep scrolling down. So what do you think about what Kelly put here about providing the burden on the applicant, which I kind of like, just reiterating that things outside of above, the burden is on the applicant to explain why.
I find that okay.
Okay. So parking, this is kind of for all of them again. These are pretty general. And I think, and these are really, they're kind of also in the design guidelines, but I think they're as helpful because middle housing and parking is all very interrelated, and you are required to provide 1 parking space per unit, but a parking space can be a pad, it doesn't necessarily have to be a garage. So paved driveways and parking areas are located to the side or rear of the structure. Front yard areas should be comprised of landscaping, so you don't get to pave a little parking spot in front of the front of the house. And driveway width should be consistent with the predominant driveway of the district, so you don't get a really large driveway. So those are pretty standard. Is there anything else you think we're missing from the parking section that really is different and should be addressed when you're thinking about middle housing?
Do you think it would be appropriate to state something in this section that says like vehicles are not to be parked in landscaped areas? Because I could see that being a roundabout. Somebody's like, well, I have grass, but I just park my Mini Cooper on the grass. I know that we had an issue with a neighbor parking a car just on the yard on the side of their house where there was no driveway.
Sure,
So
I can modify the second sentence, comprised of landscaping, and provide a second piece that, and not for parking, and not
just like to clarify,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you can't have landscaping and park there to,
Yeah,
to
got it.
pass both of those. Okay.
Yeah. One thing that came up in a lot of public comments when we reviewed the cottage housing application in Kenema was that people didn't like the idea of having a parking lot in the residential area there. And so they didn't like the parking being grouped together for all of the separate units into one kind of parking lot. So I don't know if there's maybe a comment or something about considering breaking up the parking areas into multiple smaller groups or something, if they, to avoid large groupings of parking or something like that.
Yeah, that definitely we can add it to the cluster home section in the back if it's not already there. But yeah, we can put it in both sections. But yeah, I think you're probably going to hit it more in cluster homes. Whereas, but I guess I could see a fourplex maybe trying to create a parking area, so that might be valid
Yes.
in both. Okay. And then in this kind of combining things, we kind of saw duplex, triplex, fourplexes as a type of middle housing. They're just different variations of either detached units. So in a sense, you're looking at a smaller home, or attached units. So you're really looking at this question of like, if you have 2, 3, 4 units, you're still designing it based on a single family designs type. And that's back to that 1.5%, times massing. So we kind of group these together. So new attached plexes can be designed look like one single family home, or can be designed as separate units attached with a hyphen set back from the front facade. So in some situations, even if it's a new duplex, they can still design it as 2 single family home styles, and then a small hyphen farther back that attaches them, that for the purposes, it meets the purpose of attached, but you're really seen as 2 separate units. So that's something to think about. And then, but if it's really like 2 units within one volume, that's kind of more towards the 1.5 size. And then I added the detached units are encouraged, just to remind them that we like detached units. Go for it. If there's something to think about the hyphen and the separation, because I can see potentially saying, oh, I'm going to design 2 homes, and then they're just 2, kind of bigger homes, and they're trying to do 1.5 and 1.5 with this little hyphen to get away around something. So I don't want to say that the 2 separate home idea, you are at 0.75 and 0.75. There may be at times when, you're at 1 and 1, and it's fine because they're separated by enough setback between each other. Maybe it's like 10 to 15 feet or 10 feet. And so they really read as separate units. And so it's okay that there's this rear hyphen, but I don't know if there's an additional sentence to remind people you can't game the system to build 2 big attached units. So I don't know what people have thoughts.
In this particular area, or one of the areas, I have this great concern that as we try to spec out middle housing, what we're doing is we're not creating middle housing or affordable housing. And if I try to word or look at the term middle housing, what we're trying to do is create a type of house that fits into a price range. And with today's material and labor and land costs and SDC fees, how do we, all we're doing, we're playing around with fringe terminologies, but at no time are we really accomplishing affordable middle housing that middle income people can afford to buy. And so I become concerned in this area, be it a duplex or a triplex, and they're saying it's 1.5 stories or 2 stories or whatever it is. But in the end result is, if we're creating something that sells for over $500,000 a dwelling unit, in the financial sense, it is not middle housing. And so I worry about that, and I think, and until we come up with something that parameterizes, or, well, we say if you can create something that will sell for 350,000, and you need to have this and this to make it happen, then it becomes something that we should be looking at. But what we're doing is we're playing around the fringe, and houses are going to be 650,000 and using middle housing codes. And we have not provided any type of relief to creating affordable housing for people with middle incomes.
I absolutely agree, Paul. This is where I play my little planner, remind everybody that the middle housing code just created these as options. Middle housing is not affordable housing. It's just additional housing options. So kind of the things that Paul's so passionate about as relates to how to make these an asset so more people can afford to take advantage of them. It's, as always, it's way more complicated. It takes on fees and finances and larger policies that really go in front of the city commission, but it's something that the board can make recommendations to. But I just want to remind everybody that, as always, the historic review board, we can't look at what things are, what the price of something is not really germane to your design review. There could be larger policy questions about, recommending changes the city commission may make to better complement historic infill and making these more affordable. But I do want to caution against thinking about this as it relates to sales price. So. Is there anything in the configuration that you want to add to or revise or flat out say is not appropriate in historic districts?
I think it should be design compatible based upon our design guidelines.
Right. And so maybe it's just referring people, which we do in the how to use this section, but just remind people like, okay. So continue reminding people consistent with design guidelines. Okay. Should we move on, or is there anything else people want to talk about in this section? Okay. So we have entryways, and this is an interesting one because there's other variations that aren't necessarily bad, but this is a chance to provide direction. So we have entryways should be located on the street facing facade of the structure and should be designed to read as a single entry. Multiple front doors and a single defined entry acceptable, for example, 2 or 3 doors on a central front porch. And you've also seen those an historic duplex very often had 2 doors right next to each other and a shared porch that read as one single family house. You could also achieve this through the location of doorways around a central recessed entry, or alternative units may be assessed from a secondary entrance located on the rear of the structure. I think what is not allowed and what we definitely don't want to have is multiple defined entries. So like you have maybe a roof with 2 peaks on the front porch that are trying to orient themselves to 2 front doors, and they're not read. It doesn't read as a single structure. So duplexes, 3plex, 4plexes, or multiple defined entries are not allowed unless units are attached with a hyphen. But is there anything else that you want to make sure that we explicitly say is not compatible on how you do your doorways? So once again, we stop people from moving forward with a design that wouldn't be approved.
I think that description, I think, covers it. Grant, sorry, you and I always try and talk.
Nope, all good for me.
Okay. So now we have townhomes.
Hey, Christina,
Yeah.
there is a really, I mean, I think it's a historic structure. It's on the corner of Jackson and 9th, and it's well done, and there are separate recessed entryways for individual apartments. There's not one single main dominant place. And I think that that is completely acceptable. I don't know if we need to have like one.
Okay.
I don't. I think that there are probably some exceptions to especially if it's got a lot of units. I think that's a 5-plex. If it has.
So-
And it was in the photos that you
Yeah.
sent out.
So I'm wondering if maybe there's like I don't know, maybe there's an area like we have not principal, not allowed, maybe exceptions for like.
There's also on the corner of Jackson and 6th Street, there's like a multifamily home, and it's sort of, it's got units that are sort of placed together, and it's a single structure, but it's got multiple entryways. I don't know if I don't want to undo everything we've just done for that.
It is, this is a great question. This was a hard one to write. Like we kind of wrote it and then, is this needed? Like, is there direction needed for this? Is there something you think is really important to have related to entries? Or, like always, what don't you want? And do we make sure that we say that?
But in affordable walk-ups, I could have 2 parallel doors. I could have 4 doors in the front, 1 on each side for the lower levels, and then 2 doors that lead to steps that go to basically walk-up units upstairs. And that historically is kind of like a design of a lot of affordable 4-plexes.
So I'm kind of hearing that it's not really where the doors are, it's that it reads as a building.
Yeah, I think so.
Rather than like a faux townhouse.
Or adding, widgets or like things on it to try to differentiate into separate units when it should be reading as a single volume. Even if you have recesses or entries, they all work together as one building.
Yeah, like there's a cohesion between them. Maybe they all have like a similar appearance. So as one isn't dominant, or they're not competing necessarily with each other, but they fit within the style of the building and they make sense as entryways.
Well, let me. Okay.
Oh, sorry, Christina.
No,
almost like they read more like a side porch or something on a larger single family home. Does that make there can be those entryways on single family homes that are
very much so. I think that's implied in this one. I think what I'm hearing is there's a lot more scenarios where there's multiple entries on the front that might be just fine. So let me try to rewrite this in the next version that kind of gets, I think, what I'm hearing. And maybe it is just reduced and more, the principle may be, not as descriptive. And then we can, fine tune the wording and what we don't want to allow. All right, so let me continue. Townhomes. So we flat out say, townhomes are not an historically represented type in either the Kenema National Register District or the McLaughlin Conservation District. Townhomes should follow, we're thinking, definitely vernacular style is appropriate in either district. Once again, I just really can't fathom a scenario where you're going to get townhomes in Kenema, but and then Queen Anne in vernacular works in McLaughlin. I think bungalow style for a townhome is going to be really hard just because they're a very vertical design type and bungalow is a very horizontal design type. So that's what we propose. And I'm getting feedback. I'm sorry. So that's curious what people have comments for related to the design stop. And then we have in Kenema right now, we have 3 units are to be no more than 3 units attached together. And the question is, should that be the same for McLaughlin or a different number? Citywide, you can have up to 6 attached, and there are 1,500 square feet lots that are allowed for any zone. And of course, front-facing attached garages are not allowed. So is there anything here you think should be refined or added? And do you have a comment related to the McLaughlin district and restrictions on how many units attached?
I know we touched on it a little bit earlier when we were discussing the massing, and if we were to say, referencing the nearest 6 historically designated or contributing structures, and 1.5 times the mass, would we then divide that by 3 or 4 or however many we decided to be allowed in McLaughlin specifically, is what I'm just considering. Like how tiny would each of those townhouses be within those parameters? Or are we saying a different specific massing specifically for townhouses?
I think
I'm
you
trying
can
to imagine the size of each of these and how many would be appropriate to
Yeah, I think you can do both. I think if you are going to do something different, be explicit about townhomes and why. And then I think, as always, you need to create a scenario that's actually feasible and buildable to make sure that we're not out regulating a use.
My biggest concern when we get into smaller lots, trying to make a triplex or clustering too many units, is how much impervious surface are we allowing to be covered in these small lot scenarios, and in trying to be compatible with historically what has been evident in history in these historic districts.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you're bringing the big point is this is a hard type in historic districts. And we heard very clearly from the state, the Oregon City needs to come up with design guidelines that allow it to be built within parameters that are compatible. So we need to find a place that allows it, but can prescribe what it looks like, but not to the point where we're disallowing it by regulation.
I think that 3 townhouses in a row is probably going to be generally a good limit, like for as far as massing and not getting a huge, span that's going to really outsize everything around it. I think 3 townhomes is probably reasonable here as well.
So the situation, if you had space for 5, let's say you platted 5 lots, it would be a 3 and 2.
With maybe, would that then be that they were each facing one direction on the lot and then parking was in between and all of the little garages or parking or whatever?
Well, if you say parking can't be in the front, then they have to figure that out. So
yeah,
I mean,
okay.
Yeah. So it could be, and it could be the situation that, you're creating a scenario for a mythical lot. So there may be a mythical lot that works, and there may be a lot of lots where when you start to place it all together and you're trying to figure out how to get the rear garages and access, maybe you can't plat what you want. But I think we have to think about a mythical lot where this could be built. And then, so I am hearing go to 3 for both McLaughlin and Kenema. And then the other piece is there a bigger setback between the buildings? Right now, we could put a minimum setback of 5 feet or 8 feet. I mean, we don't want to put a lot because once again, that's regulating out the use, but think about what would be the minimum setback to require between the units for separation.
Between
the massings of, like, if you had a 3 and a 2
neighboring lot. Okay.
So is it more than 5 feet?
Yes, 10, there should be 5 feet or
On
on
each
each
side.
building,
Okay.
or 10 feet separating 2 different clusters.
Okay. All right. Anything else on townhomes before we move on to Kelly put cottage clusters, but the new HB 2001 is cluster housing because we have to all just keep using different words. So the revised version will use our new terminology for that's HB 2001 compliant, which is cluster housing, which is the same thing as cottage clusters. But before we move on, is there anything else from townhomes you want to provide comment on? Okay. So the cluster
Sorry.
homes. Okay.
I'm sorry. I had my mute on.
Yeah.
The only thing about having units like 3 and 2 and having a 5-foot section in between is that I don't think we want to create like strange little alleyways where like things can happen that we don't necessarily want. You know, I don't know if any of you have lived in bigger cities, but sometimes you get these like weird spaces between buildings, and then, you know, they're kind of creepy, and strange things happen there, or garbage piles there, or I think.
Well, most likely it would be fenced. It would be part of people's property.
Right.
So it's just a setback between.
It's not necessarily like an alleyway.
No. It would be basically you're just requiring a larger setback on the 2 sides on it. So it's really it'd be 5-foot setback on either side of the because each of these townhomes, these are going to be individual lots, individual like 1,500 square foot lots.
I see. So we're saying if there's 5 units on one lot, though,
There'd be 5 separate 1,500 square foot plats.
I see.
But you
Okay.
might have a building that has 3 units that goes over like 3 of those plats, and then another building with 2 units that goes over 2 of those plats.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. So cluster homes, let me just tell you a little bit about HB 2001. Citywide, they are now what we call a type 1 process, but for historic districts. So if I wanted to do a cluster housing project up on Hilltop, and I had a single family residential, or not single family anymore, but a residentially zoned property, I can have up to 12 cluster units per lot. So the way the state statute said is you can't put a max on, you can't put a density for cluster homes. It's not, they remove the ability to do a density calculation. Like your lot is this big, therefore you get this many. It's a different way. So in Oregon City, we said you can have up to 12 cluster homes on one lot, regardless of your size, but then it becomes almost a Tetris game because you also have to provide parking and open space that's this dimension. And so it depends on your sizes of your homes have to be between this square footage and this square footage and average this. So it's really like a calculator problem. And so it is up to the applicant to see how many outside of a historic district, how many cluster housings can fit on the lot based on all the other needs. So parking needs, open space needs, access needs, how many could you get on there? And so it would vary. Some people may not get to the maximum because they don't have physical space. So once again, not a lot of large lots in McLaughlin, but you can have as little as 4. So you could have a 4 unit cluster home. So you could do that. In a sense, you could 4 detached duplexes, but then you're required to design a common green in the middle. So that's something that the board could see. The other thing that, so in a sense, they would look at the design, and then on your end, is there a point, are you in the same situation where the applicant does their math, they design the homes, these cluster homes, to be vernacular or Queen Anne or bungalow, whatever the design type is, and they have these smaller versions, and they play the Tetris game. based on how they can fit everything. Can the board could potentially reduce the number of units on a qualitative scale, but I'm not sure what the criteria would be. Like you were allowed 12 by the code, you put 8 in because you physically could put 8 in, but we want to see 6. And I mean, technically you could get there, but I don't know what your criteria would be about, you're still, I guess, looking at the massing of the neighbors around you. I mean, this is a hypothetical lot, once again, that's big enough to do all these number of units, which could be more like a landmark with a larger property, might be something. So maybe it's a little bit easier with a landmark because you're putting space separation between the landmark and the cluster units. So you can do more of that setback. Whereas if it's an infill lot in McLaughlin, it's a little bit harder to come up with a number that's arbitrarily less because it's too many units. So I was curious I don't have the answer for this, but I'm curious what the board may think of cluster homes, either as vacant lots in McLaughlin or as it relates to maybe an infill with a landmark.
I have a question.
Sure.
Are these subject to the lot coverage like limits that
They are.
the historic
I'm
homes
gonna check on that because a cluster homes is slightly different. Everything else is subject to lot coverage, but I'm going to check on cluster homes.
Okay.
Give me one
I
second.
can't imagine getting
Yeah.
12 of these on a
No,
Laughlin or 8 even,
Yeah.
and then still being within 40% or 30% lot
Mhm.
coverage or whatever the limit would be on that specific lot.
Let me stop sharing my screen for a second and let me do a quick look. I haven't memorized everything yet from this project, so give me one second.
Fair.
Let's see, I'm looking at the dimensional standards chart. Oh, yeah, no, it's none. So that's what I knew it was special. I'm going to show you this. I'm going to go back to the Zoom. I'm going to share my screen. I have a new just dimensional standard chart that we've created in planning. So if you see the different residential zones, and you'll see maximum lot coverage, it shows the different ones. And then we have a slightly higher for ADU. And then cluster housing is none. Is that because that's a state directive? So I'm going to unshare and go back to.
So just to clarify, is that saying that, if on my lot in McLaughlin, I wanted to build, I don't know, a townhouse or a duplex or something on the back half of my lot, it would not be required to be under that 40%?
No, so if you're doing a duplex or a triplex or a fourplex, you are meeting
you are
your zone standards. If you're doing a cluster home,
okay,
the state says you don't have lot coverage. It's actually more of, it's that Tetris game of you got to do your open space, you got to do your parking, you got to do all these things, and your houses are 800 to 1200 square feet. So it's really how many do you want to fit in within your lot size, and it can be up to 12 in Oregon City per lot.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah,
that gives me a better picture of.
Yeah, and so I'm sure there are lots out there, and I don't know what it is. Not a lot. I mean, the bread and butter in McLaughlin probably will be detached duplexes and detached triplexes, or maybe a new duplex or new triplex. So that's probably what the board will get a lot of, but this is something that could happen. So it won't happen in Kenema because of the geologic hazards, and the lot sizes are so small in areas that aren't geologic hazards that you're not putting 12 units on 5,000 square feet. So it's not really something that you're going to see pursued in Kenema. So I'm curious what people's thoughts are related to cluster housing.
I just think it's a dangerous area that we are yet to address. It will happen to us, and we will shake our head. And I I just wish that cluster housing was parameterized into something smaller, and with the idea of trying to create something that is truly affordable. And my goal in this area would be to how do we create roofs over people's heads that might not otherwise be able to afford to have a roof. And therefore, this, even if it's much smaller, as long as it creates this roof, I think that that's acceptable. And I just don't like the idea of creating 800 or 1,200 square foot cluster structures and then giving them unlimited ability to stuff them in. I'm not accomplishing my goal or the goal.
I have a question following up with that. Is it says in the cottage cluster description here, it says typically 100 or 800 to 1,200. Does that mean that they have to fall within that range, or if somebody came to us with
Yeah, no, they would have to fall within that
Okay.
range. So
Okay.
I can, this was also written kind of before the standards were adopted. So now I can go back and be like, we adopted this. So there, I mean, really it is that you'd be looking at, so maybe I add a section that says like, you know, it's a, I'm going to be technical here, but it is a over the counter review and like refer to city standards on cluster housing. And then this is how the board's going to look at the compatibility of it and can put additional restrictions on it. But what you can't do is the board couldn't allow a 1,300 square foot. They don't have the authority to allow a 1,300 square foot unit.
Could they,
If it, because then it's not cluster housing. They would have to go to the planning commission to get a planning commission variance.
could, on the opposite side of that though, could they allow, 500 square foot unit?
No.
Okay.
So you have to meet the, and once again, I'd have to go back and look at the actual code. I would want to cite it, but it's a formula. So you meet the formula. And if you want to do something that doesn't meet the formula, in Oregon City, a variance goes to the planning commission. So they could get that variance from the planning commission and then come back to the board for the design approval. And the board could, write a letter of support or, you'd provide direction to the planning commission policy wise, but the board doesn't have that authority. They would have to, if the planning commission has authority for variances to city code.
Thank you for clarifying.
So you don't have to have all the answers tonight. What I can do is I can, in the August meeting, I can provide the updated changes, and then maybe between now and the August meeting, start thinking about cluster home. And I want to show you real quickly. If you go to the city website, can you see me changing to the city website?
Yes.
Okay, so on this, if you go to government and planning, and you'll see on the right side, it says housing choices code update. And then there's a plus button. If you click on this Ledge 2201, which is this page, it has all the adopted code. So I'm going to scroll down. It has PDFs of all the adopted code, links to the packets for middle housing, and that dimensional chart I showed. So you can kind of take a look at the code that was adopted. And maybe you can start thinking about that this month. It takes a little bit from when we adopt code to have it get into our Muni code, which is a third party. So really for the next 6 months, this is where the adopted code will lie. So I'll stop sharing, but I'd recommend to go into that, take a look, and then we can revisit cluster homes at the August meeting. We have one application I'm about to notice, follow up to this Tracy Rock, the 6th Street project, and then this so far is on our August hearing. And I think we lost Grant.
And I need to go out and do some watering
Okay.
plants.
So I can take these comments and for them. And I don't know, was there any communication at the end of the meeting anybody wants to add on to before? Okay. Well, I'm a pleasure to come back and work with you all. I don't know how long I'm going to be doing this, but in the interim, I will be your contact for the Historic Review Board. And any questions, feel free to email me and we can chat if you want to, even about design guidelines or other items.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christina.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good evening, everybody.
You too.
So actually, I think someone needs to close the meeting, but
Oh, what do I say? I can't
this
remember.
HRB meeting's adjourned.
I